This is Nursing Uncensored. I'm your host, Adrianne Benning, and I invite you to listen in on conversations I've had with real nurses about the crazy and wonderful lives we lead. This podcast is meant to create laughter in addition to serious discussion, and nothing is off limits. We're always honest, but we're not always safe for work. Please listen responsibly. Welcome to Nursing Uncensored. I am happy to be here today to talk to a guest who is actually not a nurse, but I think this is really important that all nurses and nursing students listen up. I'm here today with Marcus Engel. Marcus, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad that we're getting this opportunity to talk today. I would love for you to please just take a minute and introduce yourself to our audience. Tell us about yourself and the work you do. And then I've got a whole bunch of stuff I'd love to talk to you today about. So you've got the floor, friend.
Well, thank you again for having me. And like you said, I'm not a nurse. That designation is saved for people who are a lot better than me. I am not a nurse, but I love nurses, and I've worked with nurses for, 15, 20 years now. Worked with actually everyone across the healthcare spectrum. I am a professional speaker. I am an author. I am a healthcare consultant, and I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Notre Dame, and I teach pre-meds in a course that is called Introduction to Personalism in Medicine, and it's teaching these future doctors how to be with another human being during their time of suffering.
Because there's a lot of things that people may not realize if they've never been in a circumstance where they're receiving healthcare. Healthcare, when you're in the hospital, I've been in the hospital, not as much as many others, but I've been in the hospital, and we literally take away everything from you. We take away your clothing, we take away your autonomy, we take away your ability to move sometimes. There's so much that's involved with being a patient in healthcare. And as healthcare workers, we get into this because we want to help people, we care about people, but sometimes in the stress and the grind, especially with everything going on now in healthcare, we might forget that the tasks that we're doing are for a person on the other end of that task or of that care that they're receiving. And you are no stranger to healthcare. You come with a very specific experience that makes you an authority on how nurses interact with their patients. And you have, you do your public speaking to bring this message to healthcare providers. And while I have lots of different disciplines that I'm sure listen to the show, nurses really, I think I want to hit home today for, because this is such an important message. Will you talk a little bit, please, about your experience with healthcare and how you've grown to become the person that has kind of started the movement that you've started?
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. I've heard some of your other guests say, I never thought I'd go into this field, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was working in a totally unrelated industry. I was working in retail, or I was working in food service or something. Healthcare or medicine, none of that was ever in my scope of view growing up. And I guess speaking of scope of view, to give you, especially if you're watching this on YouTube or another video, you'll see me sitting here. I am not just wearing sunglasses because I'm extremely cool.
You are too, but
well, okay, that's good. I'm actually totally blind, and my seeing eye dog is a yellow Labrador named Elliot, and he's laying here at my feet right now.
What a good boy.
So I never thought of going into healthcare or medicine or nursing or anything like that growing up. It was just not. I had three of my four aunts are nurses, so it was in my family, but I was never drawn to that. And then I started college. I'm originally from Missouri, and I started college at Missouri State University just 5 or 6 months after I graduated high school, and came into St. Louis for a weekend whenever I was 6 weeks into my freshman year, came into St. Louis to see some friends, and we all went to a St. Louis Blues hockey game that Saturday night. And it was on our way home from that game that a little something happened that turned me from a typical 18-year-old college freshman into a little more the person you see today. That night I always tell people that we were going back to my buddy's house after the hockey game. That's true, but first we were going to White Castle, one of my favorite things in the world. And on our way to the restaurant, we were broadsided by another car, and that car crash not only left me completely, totally, and permanently blind instantaneously, but I also received what is called a Lefort 3 fracture, which, if you're not familiar with the term, means pretty much everything from the hairline through the chin is broken. Literally crushed every bone in my face. The driver of the car that hit us had a blood alcohol concentration that was well above twice the legal limit. It's simple physics. When object A hits object B goes flying, and A stays still. And that's the same thing that happened with us. The car that we were riding in did a bunch of barrel flips, side over side through the intersection. And I ended up actually laying face down in the concrete. I can very, very vividly remember coming back to consciousness and tasting blood and tasting gasoline, and feeling my entire head just felt like it had been pulverized. So yeah, it was emergent enough that a paramedic criped me in the street. I had to create the alternative breathing passage while I was still in the field. And once they got me stabilized enough to get me in the ambulance, rushed me to the emergency room at Barnes Hospital in St. Louis, level 1 trauma center associated with Washington University's med school. And it was there in that hospital that I spent the next month and a half witnessing the good, the bad, and the profound in patient care. So that's what I get to speak about, write about, consult about, and teach about is this idea: how do we show ultimate compassion to those patients and those families of patients that are suffering? How can those who are at the bedside really give those patients a dignified, independent, and personal healing experience? How can we do that through our words and our tone and our actions?
Absolutely. This is a critical point in medicine and nursing care. I know that I just to tell you just a quick little bit, I got my start, my first job in the hospital was working on the neurosurgery intermediate care unit. So we're taking care of patients that have had massive traumatic brain injuries. They've had massive cranial and facial damage. They cannot speak, they can't eat. They really are dependent upon us for everything that they need in that day. And we, as healthcare workers, get very focused on the tasks, the medications, the therapies, safety, all these things. And we sometimes forget that there's a terrified human on the other side of all of these injuries, and how we interact. Even something as simple as I've had other nurses and other care providers, like nursing assistants, ask me about how I talk to patients that are not conscious. They're either sedated or maybe they have a change in their level of consciousness. And I still talk to them. I still say, I'm going to touch your hand. I'm going to pick up your arm and put it on your belly. We're going to roll to your left side now. These are things that some healthcare providers, they don't do. They just come into the room and they begin working as though this is an inanimate object. They're working on a car and they got to get their task done so they can get out of the room. And that's the wrong approach, because along with physical healing, there's so much. I mean, even as nurses, we know that our mood affects so much of how we're feeling physically. And now when that's magnified by illness or injury, what we say and what we do, or what we don't say and what we don't do, plays a huge factor in that person's recovery.
Sure.
And I know that I have family members who have been in ICU, sedated, paralyzed, intubated, and they have these little memories that kind of come in and out, like scenes from a really, terrifying movie where they're basically being thrown back and forth, being treated roughly, not being talked to. And that's a trauma. That's a legitimate trauma. So
Insult
you
to injury, right?
yeah, absolutely. And so I've listened to some of your keynote speeches online, and I encourage people to Google them and listen. Oh,
I'm
whoops.
so sorry.
That's okay.
Let
Take your
me
time.
sorry,
Take your
my
time. It's okay. Actually, that's interesting. I only learned just recently over the last few months how people with sight impairment use their devices, their phones and
Mhm.
whatnot. And so that was someone with, that was a service that was reading your screen, right?
Right. It's a software program that's called JAWS, that stands for Job Access with Speech, and it's a screen reading software that allows me to actually utilize
Hmm.
my laptop, and every smartphone has some type of program like that. It's really great to see the accessibility
Yes.
uh, advances that have come along in the last several years for people with disabilities.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just recently learned about those, and I'm happy to see
Yeah.
those things. But yeah, so in your receiving of care, you had all of these. You said, I like the way you put it. You said what you've seen the good, the bad, and the profound in
Yeah.
medicine, and that's led you through your recovery and your journey back to being able to be out of the hospital, independent, living life again. And you've taken this and you've essentially turned it into a calling. I think it's not just a job. I imagine you probably feel so as well. One of the videos that I just watched about an hour ago, you said something that really struck me, and you said that this was how you were like giving back to healthcare. This was how you were giving back to those healthcare providers. And I would love for you to talk a little bit more about the message you have and the journey it's taken and how you've written 4 books. Is that right?
Yeah, 4 or 5, something like that.
Four,
Yeah.
no big deal. 4 or 5, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love for you to expound a little bit upon this message, and tell us about. I love the title of one of your books is "I'm Here: Compassionate Communication in Patient Care." And I'd love to focus a little bit of time on that message of compassionate care, um, how you viewed it, and what are some experiences that have kind of shaped this message that you're now
Yeah.
delivering.
Yeah. So the book and the message, it all comes back. It all comes back to the night that they rolled me into the emergency room. And as you can imagine, I was hanging on by a thread at that moment.
And you're 18 at this point. Like,
Yeah, I'm
this is
18.
not like you're an adult, you've got senses of coping mechanisms. Like, you're basically like fresh out of childhood, like
Yeah.
young adult. So that's even scarier to think.
Yeah. What was kind of even interesting, even more interesting about that is I was with 3 friends whenever we were hit. And my friend I was maybe 6 months past my 18th birthday, but my friend who was driving was still a month or two short of his 18th birthday. So he actually went to a neuro pediatric floor
Mm-hmm.
while I went to adult ICU head and neck. Um, but even before that, the story, gosh, the story that I love to tell, and I feel like um, it's my honor and my calling is to tell, is the story of survival from that those first moments. I don't remember a whole lot about the night that they rolled me in. I remember getting to the emergency room. I remember having my clothing cut off of me, uh, and everything else I remember during the night was having the gift of unconsciousness during portions of the night. And I say that that's a gift because when you're unconscious, you're not in pain,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're out of consciousness. And so every time that I would come crashing back into consciousness, the world that I came into, it was pain, it was terror, it was darkness, it was more pain, more terror, more darkness. But the one thing that gave me comfort was the fact that all throughout that night, every time that I would wake up, I could tell that somebody was holding my right hand. And the owner of that hand would always say the same things to me every time she could tell I was awake. She would say, Marcus, my name is Jennifer. You were in a car accident and you're in the hospital. And it was just the most bare bones information you could give me, but that's all I could take at that moment. But as Jennifer held my hand, she kept saying over and over the two most compassionate words that any human being can say to another. And those words are, I'm here. I'm here. And when we can fully be present and intentionally conscious and empathetic for our patients during their most vulnerable moments, that's when we're at our deepest level of humanity. And you said a while ago about how nurses can get task oriented coming into a room, and I need to check this monitor, I need to administer this medication, I need to do XYZ to this patient. And it's understandable why people can get task oriented. You know why? Because we're all human, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're all human. We're all going to get, especially on a job, right? We're going to find moments that it becomes mundane, or we're bored, or we're more focused on getting this done so I can get the next thing done, and getting the next thing done so I can get the next call light that's coming down the hall. What I really want everyone to remember is that deep vulnerability and fear and pain and confusion that so many patients have when they're hospitalized. And when we can come back to remembering that it's another day on the job for your average bedside caregiver, but it may very well be the worst point of that person's life.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can stop and just stay for a moment and sit with a patient in their suffering, using those words, I'm here, I think that's when we're at our most deeply human, taking care of other human beings who are hurting.
Absolutely. And I think that in our communication, we can convey so much with just, like you said, it's just 2 words. She didn't have to go on a profound monologue to tell you, all of these things. It was just simple as knowing that you weren't alone in that moment. Because at that point, it's true, when you're hospitalized, so much of normalcy and just our normal body processes and states are altered, and that's not something that you can do. Like, you can't change that. You can't just will yourself to be better. And so we need to remember that in those times, there's especially now with everything, everyone is like, in my hospital, we're cross training on units that we're not familiar with. We're cross training in higher levels of care. We're scared, in addition to being like very focused and learning and, stepping up to this challenge that we're facing with this current pandemic. And it's especially now important for us to remember that that person that's on the other side of that care is especially scared, because now there's this added element of people being afraid to be in the hospital, be around other people who are sick, being exposed to healthcare providers that may or may not be burned out. And so this is a really important thing that I think we all need to remember, is that when you're scared, whether or not you're young, old, serious accident, minor accident, that knowing that the person that's giving you care is not just, because even though I may have another call light to answer, when I'm in your room as your nurse, I am with you, and I'm doing everything in my power to give you that time that I have allotted for you. And that can either be a time where like you said, I'm just hanging meds, doing my assessment, out of the room, or it can be a time where I'm saying, really, how are you doing? I'm not a touchy-feely person, but I am someone who likes to hold hands, touch shoulders. And I've had patients say to me, like, that's the first time someone's touched me in a kind way since I've been here. And
Yeah,
those moments make me both happy that I was able to do that for them, but also absolutely devastated that the experience they're having is that they're not getting that extra empathy, that
that
compassion.
human connection.
Uh-huh,
Yeah.
right. And my hospital has done training called Compassionate Connected Care.
Mhm.
And it just kind of brings our focus back to how are we talking to people? Are we allotting time for privacy, for them to express themselves? Are we paying attention to the whole person? Um, when I give pain medicine, I say, can you rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10 for me, please? And if someone says, oh, my pain's a 10, I'm not just going to push that button on the 10 in my computer charting and hand them their pills. I'm going to say, I'm really sorry you're hurting. What else can I do? Can I reposition your pillows? Do you want an ice pack, a heat pack? Have you talked to your family today? Like, these are all things that take just milliseconds of my day. And they're milliseconds I could spend on a task, but this is part of the care I'm giving. And I was really attracted to the way that you talk about this, because you do talk about how that one moment kind of defined this whole message for you. So how does that then translate when you go around to speak to care providers? I know you speak in you in lots of settings, both to healthcare providers and not. So I want people to seek out your information. I don't want you to just give us your whole story here. But I would love kind of like the Cliff Notes version of like, how do you want nurses and other providers to receive this message? Like, what are the big takeaways from your experiences and from the
I
message you
I
share?
always want to bring people back to that idea of presence and I'm here and being emotionally, not just physically present, but sitting with that patient during their suffering and pain. One of the things that I love to get to tell about this story is that for 20 years, I didn't know anything about Jennifer. I'd never known Jennifer's last name from that night in the emergency room and how much comfort she gave me. I've written about that in several different books, even titled one of my books, "I'm Here,"
Mhm.
just to help people remember to come back to that idea of being present for other people while they're suffering. But one of the things I love to share is that I didn't know what Jennifer's position was. I didn't know she was a nurse or anything. And even my family had to question my recall during that time. I was on a lot of drugs that night, as you can
Mhm.
probably imagine.
Mhm.
And did I just dream up? Did I just dream up Jennifer? Did I hallucinate her? And so what I what I came to discover several years ago, I was giving a keynote at the very hospital that saved my life. It was one of the coolest experiences to go back to that hospital 20 years later and get to share this message that was given to me when I was a patient. And while I was there, the director of the patient experience department came up to me after a speech and she said, Marcus, we've got a surprise for you. We found Jennifer. And to be able to hold her hands again and to know that this is the person who helped me get through that first wretched night, my goodness, what a powerful, profound experience. But even more profound was the things that I learned next, which was the fact that when Jenny first held my hand in that emergency room, she was 20 and she was a patient care tech. So Jenny didn't have years of experience and she didn't have years of higher education under her belt. She didn't have all kinds of titles and certifications, but human being to human being, she knew I was suffering and that the greatest gift she could give me at that time was simple human presence. And I would say, it doesn't matter if you're a cardiothoracic surgeon or if you're EVS or transport, we all still have that ability to be there for a person who is suffering while they're hospitalized. We
Mhm.
all have that ability. We can all come back to that. The other thing that I always want to remind healthcare professionals is that this is work that is sacred. Taking care of other human beings who are suffering, that's not retail, right? That's not
Yes.
manufacturing. That's not food service. That is a sacred relationship between patient and caregiver. It is work that I hope healthcare. Um, I only knew Jennifer for that first night. And a week or two later, after a 25 hour facial reconstruction, um, I was put into a different ICU, a head and neck floor. And my first nurse that night became one of my greatest caregivers and one of my greatest cheerleaders. Her name is Barb, and Barb actually just retired last year after 43 years
Good job,
on the
Barb.
same floor at the same hospital.
Bravo.
Incredible diligence and commitment to. She found a lane of nursing that worked for her and stuck with it. But the first thing that Barb said to me after she introduced herself was, she said, "Hey, my name is Barb. I'm a nurse here in the ICU, and I get to take care of you for the rest of the night." And I want to bring people back to that word. I get to take care of
Hmm.
you. If you're a healthcare professional, you get to do this work. And yes, it may be trying, it may be difficult, it may be emotionally burdensome, but this is sacred work. This is work that we get to do on a daily basis. And if we find ourselves saying, I have to go to work tomorrow, or I have to work this week, instead of I get to work this week, that's whenever I think we can take some time, step back, and reconnect with that reason that you ever went into clinical practice in the first place, taking care of people who are hurting.
And that's an important message even for me to hear right now, because as I've been called to step up to help in different areas of the hospital that are intimidating to me for patients that are very, very ill, I've been fearful and I've been anxious going to work. And I think that's an important distinction, that yes, I am nervous and I'm learning a lot, and I'm having those growing pains of learning a lot, that I still have um like you said, this is sacred work. This is my calling. I'm not doing this because I get fame, fortune, and all that comes with it. Like, this is hard work, but I'm in it because I initially, when made the crazy decision to go to nursing school, that I wanted to dedicate my life to this. And it's not easy to get through this. So
Mhm.
nurses need to
Yeah.
remember, we've been through a lot to earn these distinctions. Even if you're not seeking out graduate work, like, patient care is sacred work. And we all have our own faiths, and I'm not going to talk specifically about mine, but I think that that's what makes me feel like I'm earning my space here on the planet, is that I may not be an activist, or I guess I am a little bit. I'm vocal. I was going to say I'm
Mhm,
vocal
mhm.
online, but even more so, like, for me, it's about I saw nurses doing this job and I thought, I want to do that, and I want to do that to the best of my ability. So it's important that I remember that I get to do this job, that I'm blessed with the brains and physical ability to actually do it. And that's a good message for all care providers. You're tired, you're stressed, you're anxious, but you're also in a unique position to provide care that other people haven't trained for and can't do. So I think that's an important message, and thank you for bringing that to my table, because I need to hear that right now, especially.
How could any nurses, especially who are working in acute care right now, how could you not be nervous and fearful and
Mhm.
anxious about your own health, about bringing it home? about treating patients with COVID. How could anybody, that's just a normal reaction. If anybody wasn't afraid, I'd question them, right? If somebody wasn't a little nervous, and even just, let's forget COVID altogether. Let's go back to 12 months ago.
Mhm.
Nurses are, this is an emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally demanding career. It is tough. That's why I can't do it. That, and I'm blind, but it's tough. And so I this gets into another thing that I get to do other than just sharing my story. Um, guess about 8 years ago, I got a master's in a field called narrative medicine.
Yes, and I
Uh,
am so ready to talk about that.
cool.
I heard even the title. I've already looked it up on their website. I'll let you talk about
Hmm.
it in a second. Let me just fangirl for
Yeah.
just 30 more seconds.
Yeah.
I
Cool.
feel like after I heard that, I was like, that's the degree that I didn't know existed that I absolutely need. So, okay, anyway, with that excitement out of the way, please do
That's
continue to talk about this.
exactly what you said there. That was the same thing for me when I learned that this field and this master's program existed. I thought it couldn't have been more perfect for what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
What narrative medicine is, and there's a lot of different universities around the country that are creating similar programs. Some are calling it healthcare rhetoric, whatever the different titles is. Columbia in New York was the first one to come up with it, I believe, at least this idea of narrative medicine. So what do we do in narrative medicine? My definition, and I think that this is a pretty good definition, is that we take the stories of healthcare and we try to turn those into something that we can learn from. And my specific work that I do with the narrative medicine degree is part of my practicum and what I do now is called narrative nursing. And I lead groups of nurses. It's nurses, it could be doctors, it could be really anybody who delivers patient care. But typically with me, it's with nurses. And I try to get them thinking about their stories from a different perspective. And I also try to give them, in a workshop format, the freedom and permission to use those stories for learning purposes and to write about those really traumatic, difficult stories for healing, for emotional healing. You ask a lot of nurses or doctors, you ask them the question, tell me about that one patient.
Hmm.
And oh, that's going to open up a flood of stories.
Oh
Tell
gosh,
me about
yes.
that one patient.
Hmm.
Tell me about that one patient and why it was difficult for you. And when you have the ability to tell that story and write that story, it also gives us, it slows that story down, right? Because stories that get in our brain, they can go on fast forward and replay over and over and over. But when we tell that story and we're writing it out word by word, it slows our brains down and gives us an opportunity to reframe those stories. So the narrative nursing work that I do is always trying to help nurses remember the reason that they came into this field in the first place, that through their stories that they're witnessing and observing every day, that those stories can help us stay more connected to our humanity and to have that additional perspective, how we can take care of patients even more compassionately.
I know you can't see this, but I'm kind of tearing up a little bit. I'm actually wiping tears off my face because when you said that one patient, it actually did make me think of a particular patient. Um, I've been in,
Those things
it's
make marks on our soul,
it's
right?
visceral. It's absolutely
Yeah.
visceral. Like I'm sitting here
Yeah.
in my apartment, and now even just with that, what you were saying, it brought back a lot of emotion. So I'm a little,
Yeah.
I might be a little sniffly here, but anyway.
As a
uh,
professional, I would ask you to write that story. Write that
mhm,
story. And it
mhm.
doesn't have to be a 20-page long paper. Write for maybe 15 minutes, 15 or 20
Yeah,
minutes.
that's I actually will do that because it's a good story. I just want to highlight just one thing, just to share my little experience. This
Yeah.
was a patient that I took care of for 3 different admissions, and each time he had a worsening brain injury. And he wouldn't sleep because he was in such kind of like a manic state that he was just constantly moving all the time. And the only time he stopped moving, I at the time was a patient care tech. I was assigned one-on-one with him every shift, and because I was so good with him, I was his caretaker like that in that way for weeks. And it was very difficult for me. But there was one night I remember he kind of fell asleep, and the only way he would stay in bed and asleep is if I rubbed his back. It was very simple, just not even like you're thinking massage therapy, just like just kind of laying
Mhm.
there, rubbing, sitting next to his bed, rubbing his back. I will tell you, I rubbed that man's back till I could no longer feel my arm because of the relaxation and calm it brought to him for such a short period of time. And so when I tell people that story, I talk about how like that care that I provided to him, I wasn't a nurse. I didn't have any medication, but I got that man several solid hours of sleep for the first time in who knows how long. So anyway, that's my story, but that's what it
Yeah.
made me think
Thank you for
of.
sharing that.
Yeah, I mean, but we do. And you also said in one of the um, videos that I saw of you telling the story about you meeting Jenny again, like coming face to face and holding her hand. You said that you said something like, do you actually remember me? Like, do you remember
Yeah.
me? And how many hundreds of patients? I've worked in a hospital since 2005, and I remember patients not only that I took care of my first week, but I remember patients that I've taken care of over the years. I may not remember their name, but I remember the experiences I had with them. I remember their families. I remember the comfort that I tried to bring to them. And so I do think that if you were to say to a nurse or a patient care tech, you would say, who's that one patient? It probably brings a wave of patients back into our minds. And another thing I was thinking, I don't know if this is true or not, but I know that when we have patients that come in that are either very critical or very ill or very confused, whatever the case may be, you have IVs, you have catheters, you have potentially like breathing tube, feeding tube, all these things going on. And when you're human, your instinct is to pull these things out. You don't want these things. And so when we have patients that are like that, are in an altered state, they're not aware of what they're doing for safety, we'll put usually a patient care tech with that patient one-on-one for the duration of the shift. And then that care tech not only provides the physical cares, managing safety, managing lines, keeping people from pulling out their tubes and lines, but then we also have that added responsibility and gift of being able to say, like, I'm providing emotional support and keeping you from being terrified and letting you know that there is one person here that has your back 100% and is not going to let you do anything that's going to hurt your ability to survive this and get better from this. So I was just thinking about that. I thought Jenny was probably your one-on-one. And so she probably was with you till you transferred out of the emergency department into an ICU bed. And that's both a hard job and a gift. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's what made me all that. Sorry, that
No,
was a lot
that's
to take in.
great. Yeah.
Um,
She, you know, I was one-on-one with her, I'm sure.
mhm.
The other thing is I don't think you typically see cases of Lafort 3
I'm
fracture,
sure. Oh gosh, no. Oh no.
and then the fact that I was a year and a half, 2 years younger than she was at the time,
Uh-huh. Yeah,
I have to think that that made some type of impact on her soul and on her being.
absolutely.
Um, even just as people around the same age, look how precarious life can be.
Hmm.
Look how precarious life can be.
And you've come through this experience with this set of ideas that you wanted to share, and you've been very successful at it. And I'm actually very happy that you've come to talk to me about this, because you do. You have several books that you've written. You do these keynote speeches. You have this master's degree in narrative medicine. And actually, that degree, I would love to talk a little bit more about
Sure.
some of the things that entailed, getting that degree, that program, and kind of what you've learned, how you've kind of taken what you've learned there and put it into play in your job and in your life.
I feel like so my bachelor's is in sociology, and I sometimes jokingly say sociology, the most useless science that's out there.
I love it though. I love
I do too. I
sociology.
do too. And I always say that because, okay, you can get a job, but unless you have a PhD, nobody's going to give you a job as a sociologist.
Yeah.
However, sociology and communications, I put those kind of in the same vein, because nobody will give you a job, with one of those things. Nobody's going to give you a job as a communicator. But no matter what you do, just knowing human beings and cultural differences and how to speak one-on-one with a person versus how to speak with a small group versus how to speak in a large group, those are things that are all assets to any job that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of narrative medicine that way too, that originally narrative med, the book Narrative Medicine was written by Dr. Rita Sharon at Columbia. Dr. Sharon she's an internist, and she also has a PhD in English literature. And her goal was to help prepare doctors for this deeper humanity type training, and really helping physicians how to listen to the story behind the story, right? How to dig deeper into a story to find out more things about the patient and how to better serve that patient. When I was in the program, I would say 50% of my classmates were either doctors or they were going to go to med school. And I'm like, hi, I'm the lone businessman in the class that has no clinical background whatsoever. I'm not a social worker. I'm not a nurse. I'm not a doc. I'm none of these things. But again, narrative medicine teaches you to actively listen even more deeply. And I think that is a skill that is transferable, certainly across the perspective of healthcare, but also just in general, right? How do we listen more deeply? One of the big patient complaints these days, of course, is that that whether they're in a doctor's office or they're laying in a hospital bed, their caregivers or providers are spending way too much time looking at the computer and not enough time looking at the patient. That brings a whole different dynamic. And so in narrative medicine, we would look at what are the techniques that we can have to more fully engage with our patient, and so that they felt heard and held and cared for, while the provider has to be over here typing on the computer in the chart. And those are the things that I love to be able to pass along to my audiences now. Just what are the little tips and tricks that we can do for patients, in addition to saying I'm here? What are the little things that we can do for patients so that they really realize this is a therapeutic, comforting relationship? This is not just completing tasks.
Yes, and that's a great point. And specifically to that point, in my hospital, we are lucky enough that for infection control purposes, so that we're not taking one computer from room to room to room, we have computers at the bedside in all of our inpatient rooms. So that means that when I admit a patient, I have a million questions to go through and I have to stand and put them in the computer. But the way it's oriented in the room, the only way I can actually be on the computer typing as if I have my back to the patient. And then you spend time like turning around, trying to face them. You keep like turning back and forth, and it feels awkward. It's exhausting for the nurse. And so what I did, and actually one of my coworkers did it, and then I amended it for myself, but she made a paper form that goes through all of our admission questions, so that when I admit a patient, unless it's emergent and I have to be up and doing a lot of things, I pull up a chair, I sit down at their bedside, and I go through the admission questions with them. And I truly believe that facing them, because one of the things is, what brought you to the hospital? They may be upset, they may be scared, they may not even know what their treatment plan is yet, or what's going to happen to them. What tests are we going to do? How many holes are we going to poke in their body? They don't know any of this. And so having you stand with your back to them can be even scarier, because now you're like, oh, they're not even looking me in the face. So I make a point, as much as I can, I try to, even if it's just for 2 minutes, put my butt on the edge of a seat, sit and talk with them for a minute, so they don't just feel I'm towering over them, asking them questions, and then leaving the room. Those little
Yeah, that's
things.
I love that. And I love what you said there. Put your butt on the seat, right?
Yeah.
There
Even
have
if
been,
it's only like 2 to 10 minutes, like
oh
that's an
yeah.
important 2 minutes.
There's the study that's often cited about physicians that and the time perception of patients, that if a
Mm-hmm.
physician comes in the room and stands, that a patient perceives them to be there for less time than that if they sit down.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a caregiver sits down by the side of the edge of the bed, even if it only takes a couple of minutes, strangely that perception flips, that as soon as somebody sits down, it's where it may have actually only been 2 minutes of sitting, the patient might perceive it as 10 or 15 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it's taking that moment and being in that moment, with no boundaries, with not standing, not having the back turned, maybe even physically touching the patient's arm while you're taking those notes. You're doing good stuff, even just by sitting down, even just by sitting
Yeah, and then I think it also puts you physically on the same level as them, so that whether they're looking at your face or listening to your voice, it's coming directly toward, like you're talking face to face to someone. The
down. Right.
difference is that if I'm talking to you standing up across the room, that doesn't feel intimate. It doesn't feel personal. It doesn't feel like that
Equal.
time. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One of my first jobs in healthcare was in a women's health clinic, and we provided gynecology services. And the number one thing they taught us is, you meet your patient eye to eye, not with that person feeling vulnerable, naked from the waist down, or maybe in a paper gown altogether. You meet them sitting up, face to face, and you know, shake their hand or whatever. They are worthy of your attention. It's not just you walk in, pop the hood, there you go, you're doing your medical care.
Right.
This is not how it works. And that for me has always been, I mean, that was when I was 18. Those were the fundamentals that I was taught, that your patient is not an object for you to act upon, but as a person that you're entering into a partnership with, because healthcare is very much a partnership. Yes, I am going to take care of you, but then you have to, the patients have responsibilities. Tell me when you're in pain. Tell me when something doesn't feel right, so that I can do something about it if I'm able. And so I think there's very much a partnership in care here, that I
Mm.
may be the medical quote unquote authority in the room, but you're the authority on what you're feeling and what your body feels like it's doing. And I think as
Mhm.
nurses, we need to be reminded of that. We are your partners in care. And the attitude and the in ways of engaging that you're talking about, I think reinforce that.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so, because we're it is a partnership. But when you have one member of that partnership that is afraid
Hmm.
and in pain, specifically in pain, I mean, what percentage of hospitalized patients are on some narcotic,
Hmm.
right? a lot. And
Many.
it's, yes, yes. And so if you're not already in pain, that puts you out of your usual element.
Yeah.
um, but understanding that, and then also realizing that, okay, this person is in pain, they're out of their usual element. I've had lots of experiences on narcotics, and sometimes communication is very fraught
Hmm.
whenever you're dealing with patients who are on narcotics. So how can we how can we how can we step into that moment with that patient to understand fully the experience that they're having, and then also to respond to their experience, right? How do we respond back with, what is the best thing I can do for you? And sometimes that's harder to do because we're so worried about hanging that med, or
Hmm.
we've got to flush this tube. And I just think whenever we stop, we sit, like you said, sit face to face, eye to eye, as close to an equal footing as we can. It's absolutely critical, right? Because if you have a caregiver who comes into the room and who doesn't recognize your pain, much less work to reduce that pain,
Hmm.
it's a missed opportunity. It's certainly a missed opportunity. But at a more human level, it also can show disregard. It can
Yeah.
show inattentiveness, and inattentiveness uh, leads to mistakes. And
Hmm.
I'm also the not so proud recipient of a few of those mistakes over the years too. Some of those mistakes that could have cost me my life
Hmm.
due to inattentive caregivers. So whenever we talk about being present, it's not just to help ease the emotional load of that patient. It's not just for helping them emotionally. It's keeping us, you, providers and caregivers, keeping them more mindful of what's going on every moment so that less mistakes are made.
Right. Um, since a lot of my patients are respiratory patients, they have breathing issues, they're on high levels of oxygen, um, and there's a lot of anxiety that comes with not being able to breathe, and a lot of immediacy that comes. And so I often take care of patients that are afraid that if they, because I work night shift, so oftentimes families have gone home, or in this case now, we don't have any visitors in the hospital because of the pandemic. So we have people that are nervous. What if you don't hear me when I need you? Or what if you're not there
Mm,
when I need you? And so I try to reassure folks. And I'm not always successful, but many times my patients are comfortable and have good nights because I tell them how I'm watching them. Or I'll say, I've got eyes on you tonight. I know your mom went home, or your wife went home, or your brother went home. I've got my eyes on you. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'll be doing throughout the night. I'll be peeking in on you. I'll be coming in to do this and that. If I can let you sleep, I will. These are all things I tell people because I want them to understand that I'm not just there to provide basic safety, airway, breathing, circulation, all that stuff that we learn in nursing school, but I'm there to be attentive to them. Um, and if people say like, oh, I didn't want to bother you, you seem so busy, I say, let me do the time management. You tell me what you need and I will figure out how it all fits into place. And sometimes I feel that in just saying this, I've had people say to me, that makes me feel better. Or I have family members that a few days later will say, actually the last time you were here, he felt really comfortable because you did or said A, B, and C. So I try to remember to keep these things in my routine. Just
mhm.
these little things that can make a difference to people when you just don't say, okay, I'll be back to check on you later. You say, I'll be listening for your call light. I'll
I
be
got that.
whatever is appropriate in your unit.
Uh-huh.
Like I'm sitting at my unit, we try to group our patients so that I have patients that are all kind of in the same pod. And I say, all my patients, all the people I'm responsible for are all right in this area. So I'll be nearby. If I'm not outside your door, someone else will answer the light or whatever. But I think it's really important that we convey, I mean, pardon my crassness, but that we give a shit. that
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
care, that you're
Yeah.
not just like a room number on my rounds list. Um, and I think that,
I love what you said there, because what you're talking about in the business world, in the customer service world, that would be called managing expectations,
mhm,
right? That I am that you are telling the patient, I got eyes on you. I'm sitting right out here. I will hear that bell, and I will see
mhm,
that light as soon as you press the button, and I will be in here in 3 seconds.
mhm,
That is setting the expectation for a patient. That is alleviating a lot of the confusion and the fear that can go along with being a patient.
yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. I'm so glad to hear that you're so intentional about that, and I hope that other nurses will
Yeah,
take that to heart too.
I think my unit's pretty good at doing that. I know that I've learned from night shift that people are a lot less angry with you when you wake them up at 4 in the morning if they know it's coming and why. I try to tell people before they go to bed too, hey, I've got a 4 a.m. antibiotic to hang. I'll let you go right back to sleep. I'll try not to blast you with lights, but just so you know, this is going to help get you better. So this is what I'm
Mhm,
going to do. It's different than if you wake them up at 4:15 and they're like, what do you want? What are you doing?" They're confused, they're on medication, their sleep aids are in full effect. So it's really important that we communicate our plan, and also that, to that effect, that we not set unrealistic expectations.
mhm,
If you know you've got 6 patients and you might not be in there, you can say, it might not be me, but someone is watching that call light. We all are a community. We will all respond to you, even if I'm not available. So I think there's like it is a management of expectation. I'm not going to
mhm,
promise you things I can't do, but I'm also going to try to realistically tell you what your care is going to entail. That's what care planning is. Like
mhm,
nurses that go
mhm.
to nursing school say, when am I ever going to need to write a care plan? Every time you talk to your patient at the beginning of your shift, you're making a care plan.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that that is really important. And, I've had surgery before. I've been a patient. It was only the one time. So I'm blessed that I've been lucky enough to avoid many hours in the hospital. But when people get to spending many hours in the hospital, we forget that, like, I take care of patients that have chronic lung illnesses. And
Mhm,
sometimes we take for granted that they know our systems and they speak the lingo and they know what we're talking about. And I've had patients, I've explained things to people before that I think, they probably already know this. But then they say, oh, really? That's why. I never knew. Thank you for explaining that to me.
mhm,
And it's like, it takes me back. It makes me pause and say, wow, this person's been receiving care from us for X number of years, and they didn't know that's why we did this for them.
right.
And so we can't make assumptions about what people need. And so I don't know, what do you think? Sometimes it's just really important that nurses say, what can I do to help you? What's going to make you feel safe, better, less
Right.
anxious,
Yeah.
whatever. What would you do if you were at home and you were feeling this way? You know?
Yeah, it's such an interesting um, dynamic when we talk about managing expectations and managing care. That that like you said, we don't overpromise,
Mhm.
because we know if we make a promise and we cannot keep that promise, that's broken trust,
Mhm.
right? And even if it's something as simple as I'm telling you, I'll be back at 4 a.m. to give you this antibiotic. Well, then, if it's 5:15 a.m. and
Mhm.
they've been sitting there since 4 awake waiting, that feels like a broken
Right.
promise.
Right.
And when that trust is broken, that can harm that therapeutic relationship greatly. So, yeah, under promise, over deliver. So
Yes,
kind of the
of
same thing
course.
we talk about in the business world: under
Uh-huh.
promise and over deliver. And manage those expectations by proper communication. I also love what you talked about there, that the lingo that this is the word, these are the words and the abbreviations that you use every day,
Mhm.
but a patient may not understand what uh, these initials are. I mean, how many acronyms do we use a day in hospital.
And sometimes I have to Google them, and I've been
Yeah,
to nursing school. So no,
yeah,
it can be intimidating. And then you feel out of the loop, and you feel like you're not in control of your own care, or that you're
yeah.
not being considered as a full person who wants to know what the heck all that means.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've heard the term use living room language to talk to people.
Mhm,
And I try to carry that with me because um, we have to meet the patients where they are,
mhm.
communicate with them on a level that they understand, but never make an assumption. I always say to people, you may already know this, but if you don't, this is what's happening here. um, and people, you'd be surprised how many times people are like, oh cool, didn't know that, thank you for telling me
Mhm.
that. um, I think that these ways of communicating and of listening, it's a practice, okay, right? Like we never
Yeah.
reach a point where we wake up one day and say, I finally figured out how to perfectly communicate. I am fantastic at it. And we have frustrations. Our patients have frustrations. We have frustrations. And so we need to just always be kind of working. It's like, when you first start riding a bike, you fall off the bike, you get back on the bike, you try again. That common metaphor of like you fall off the horse, you get back on the
Mhm,
horse.
mhm.
I think that we have to be mindful about this being a practice and about this being something that we're always working or learning to do better.
Yeah. If you're not learning every day, there's something wrong.
What happened? Yeah,
There's
what
something
happened to
wrong.
you? Do you have a
Yeah.
heartbeat? Do you have a
Yeah.
pulse? Are you um and I think that it's especially important that we try to share this with our coworkers and our partners and our like in medicine, like those of us that work in healthcare. um One of the reasons I feel so drawn to this like narrative medicine concept or field or study or discipline, whatever you want to call it, is because with this podcast, for me, it's less about like, I have a message I want to deliver. And it's
Mhm.
more about me saying that the stories and experiences of all different types of people are valid and are worth listening to so that we can be constantly working to be better nurses, better doctors, better patient care techs, better social workers. Um, I think that in telling stories, we remember our humanity, we convey it to others. Do you have any suggestions or tips on how those of us in medicine can help take this message that you're sharing and help propagate it ourselves? Help our coworkers and colleagues see the benefit of communicating with patients in this way.
Lead by example first,
Hmm.
right?
Sure.
Lead by example first to be present for patients and families.
Hmm.
I know right now with COVID, uh, families are kind of, I don't want to say on the back burner, but to a certain extent, they're not there by the
Kind
bedside.
of. Yeah.
Uh,
Out of
but
necessity,
yeah,
unfortunately.
out of necessity. But so whenever we take that time to stop and pause and be present with patients and families, hopefully our coworkers and colleagues are witnessing that. And I think that there can be some gentle reminders um, without extreme correction.
Hmm.
Just reminding, if you hear a colleague that says, yeah, this patient down the hall, what's the term you use, that he's high maintenance patient,
Yeah.
or those kind of things. Eh, okay, he's high maintenance, somebody's complaining, I guess it's got to be pretty hard to be on a trach and a feed tube and to not have had a bath for a few days, right?
Mhm.
When we start listing off some of those things that our colleagues might not be thinking about because they're so busy trying to get to the next patient, hopefully it can serve as a gentle reminder that, look, none of us are perfect. None of us are going to communicate um, perfectly with every patient every time. I've heard from many nurses over the years who have read my books, and they've said, oh my gosh, I cringed when I read this chapter of your book because I realized that what I was saying all along, while I meant it to be helpful, it wasn't.
Mhm.
And a specific example of that is saying to a patient, "Oh, I know how you feel."
Mm.
No, you don't. You
Nope, you
can't.
don't.
You can't. You cannot walk inside that person's psyche and their experiences and their history and their upbringing and their culture. You cannot step inside, even if you have the exact same ailment or injury. You can't do that.
Right.
So, giving those kind of messages of this must be really hard, as opposed to that's much more sympathetic and empathetic than saying, I know how you feel,
Right.
right?
It's almost
This must
dismissive.
be
Like, yeah, I've been through
right.
that. Eh, eh.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, we need to remind people that and I even say the opposite to people. I say, I have no idea what you're going through right now, but I'd like to help, or I want to know how I can help, or however I'm framing it for that particular patient. But it is a reminder that no, I don't know what you're experiencing, but I'm still here with you.
Mhm.
And again, back to that message of I'm here. I don't know what this experience is like, but you're not by yourself in this.
Right. You're
Even if
not
I'm
alone.
only here 12 hours a night, 3 days a week, when you're here, I'm doing my best to be fully present for you.
Yeah.
Um, it's difficult, but yeah, I think we just need to be constantly thinking about how is this affecting? How does this sound? How would this sound if someone said it to me? Um, yeah, I think that in this message, we need to remember that it's a little bit at a time, all the time. And we do mess up,
Mm.
and we need to just acknowledge that. And I've even said to patients, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way." Um, just things that, you might say like, "Okay, now don't go running on out of here," and your patient has no
Mhm.
legs. I mean,
Right.
you want to
Yeah.
make sure that if you
Yeah.
say something that's insensitive, or like you use a common colloquial term and it's offensive,
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
say, "I'm sorry. That came out wrong." Just
Right.
acknowledge,
Right.
be respectful. And then, yeah, I think that communication is really hard to do. It's hard to humble ourselves sometimes. But it is a gift that we receive. We get to be in this very private, very personal, very unique, not in a good way unique, but sometimes very scary and unique experiences with patients. And it can be really hard to open up about that. So I,
It's an intimate relationship. That's
yeah,
for
yeah.
sure, even if it's a brief one.
And we need to remember that, and we need to treat that with the respect that it deserves. Um, I think your message is fantastic. I would love for you, as we wrap up here, to talk about how people can find more information about you. Talk about your website, your books, whatever you want to talk about. The floor is yours. How can people get more information from you?
Sure. Okay. So my website is just my name. It's marcusengel.com. And in addition to books are on the website, there's some resources on the website. Um, During this crisis, I have also been doing twice weekly Zoom calls. They're called, yes, thank you, dog, for interrupting my interview here. Uh, twice weekly Zoom calls. They're at 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. Eastern, and it's called Leading Through Crisis, a conversation with healthcare leaders. But even if you're not a healthcare leader, even if you're a bedside professional, or even if you have no connection to healthcare, medicine, nursing, anything like that, we'll still let you come on in. It's usually some conversations about trends that are going on in healthcare and how healthcare professionals, those who are at the bedside and those who are in operational support, can stay more present to handle these amazing difficulties as they're coming along right now. The
Mhm.
books are on my website. You can also get them at Amazon. And yeah, if there's anything that I can do for those of you who are truly on the front lines during this crisis, please feel free to reach out to me.
Excellent. I want to just real quick read off the titles because I want to encourage people to look this information up. I actually want to read your books as well. One is called I'm Here, Compassionate Communication and Patient Care. The other one I want to read is The Other End of the Stethoscope. I think that is a great title. And then after this, An Inspirational Journey for All the Wrong Reasons. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you got it.
And there's I feel like I'm missing one. I think there were
there's another one called Everyday Inspiration, and then there's an ebook that's called Open, and I'm working on a couple more right now.
Great.
So hopefully this time social isolation will increase my
some productivity time
as a writer.
Well, I look forward to seeing new content from you. I think your message is fantastic, and I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me and my listeners today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. And also, listeners, don't forget, it's your daily reminder or your bi-weekly reminder. Oh, that's something I wanted to share that I think is funny. I was looking at a podcast app, just like checking to make sure things are loading properly, basic podcast maintenance stuff. And I saw that one of the podcast apps listed me as, instead of releasing bi-weekly, it said fortnightly.
Fortnightly. Well, that's
fortnightly. And so I've decided that I'm now a fortnightly podcaster. So
that's great.
So yeah, people can check out nursinguncensored.com. They can find all the episodes, blogs, vlogs, and all of the rest. So thanks again to Marcus Engel for joining us today on the show. And as always, I'd like people to walk away remembering that we are blessed to get to do this job, and to wish everyone happy nursing. Here at Nursing Uncensored, we may be, uncensored, but we're not unfiltered. Protected health information has been changed and concealed to comply with HIPAA. The things we talk about are from years of experience with thousands of patients, things we've read, stories we've heard. If you think we're talking about you, we're not. Also, we're real nurses here to provide helpful and accurate information, but don't take anything we say as fact without doing your own research. Refer to your state's Board of Nursing, Practice Acts, and your institution's policies and procedures if you have questions about your practice. Lastly, our very strong opinions are ours alone and do not reflect those of our employers, educational, or professional institutions. Thanks for listening, and happy nursing, folks.